Hey everyone, today I'll be addressing a topic that I don't see a lot of people within the like red pill or anti-SJW sphere addressing, at least by name, which is ecofeminism specifically. And you can kind of tell where it's going just based on the term itself, but there's a lot more going on with it, and I think that it's actually worthwhile to take a really close look at it. Once you understand ecofeminism, you can see it as really kind of the heart of third wave feminism, and it puts you about 1 degree of separation away from, well, the rest of it. So I'm actually going to be reading a lot of just the Wikipedia article of it. I'll put a timestamp in the description so that if you prefer to just read it by yourself, you can just click on that and then jump forward a little bit. The term ecofeminism is used to describe a feminist approach to understanding ecology. Ecofeminist thinkers draw on the concept of gender to theorize on the relationship between humans and the natural world. The term was coined by the French writer Françoise Diabon in her book Le Féminisme ou la Mort, 1974. Today there are many interpretations of ecofeminism and how it might be applied to social thought, including ecofeminist art, ecofeminist theory, social justice and political philosophy, religion, contemporary feminism, and poetry. As there are different types of feminism and different beliefs held by feminists, there are different versions of ecofeminism. Ecofeminism is widely referred to as the third wave of feminism. It adds to the former feminist theory that an environmental perspective is a necessary part of feminism. Ecofeminism uses the parallels between the oppression of nature and the oppression of women as a way to highlight the idea that both must be understood in order to properly recognize how they are connected. These parallels include but are not limited to seeing women and nature as property, seeing men as the curators of culture and women as the curators of nature, and how men dominate women and humans dominate nature. Charlene Spretnik has offered one way of categorizing ecofeminist work. 1. Through the study of political theory as well as history. 2. Through the belief and study of nature-based religions. And 3. Through environmentalism. According to Françoise Diabon in her book Le Féminisme ou la Mort, 1974, ecofeminism relates the oppression and domination of all subordinate groups, women, people of color, children, the poor, to the oppression and domination of nature, animals, land, water, air, etc. In the book, the author argues that oppression, domination, exploitation, and colonization from the Western patriarchal society has directly caused irreversible environmental damage. Françoise Diabon was an activist and organizer, and her writing encouraged the eradication of all social injustice, not just injustice against women and the environment. This tradition includes a number of influential texts, including Women in Nature by Susan Griffin, 1978, The Death of Nature, Carolyn Merchant, 1980, and Gyne Ecology, Mary Daly, 1978. These texts helped propel the association between domination by man on women and the domination of culture on nature. From these texts, feminist activism of the 1980s linked ideas of ecology and the environment. For example, conferences for women devoted to living on the earth in protest against nuclear testing and other militarism that oppresses femininity. Writing in this circle discussed ecofeminism drawing from Green Party politics, peace movements, and direct action movements. Modern ecofeminism, or feminist eco-criticism, eschews such essentialism and instead focuses more on intersectional questions, such as how the nature-culture split enables the oppression of female and non-human bodies. It is also an activist and academic movement that sees critical connections between the exploitation of nature and the domination over women, both caused by men. One ecofeminist theory is that capitalist values reflect paternalistic and gendered values. In this interpretation, effects of capitalism has led to a harmful split between nature and culture. In the 1970s, early ecofeminists discussed that the split can only be healed by the feminine instinct for nurture and holistic knowledge of nature's processes. Several feminists make the distinction that it is not because women are female or feminine that they relate to nature, but because of their similar states of oppression by the same male-dominant forces. The marginalization is evident in the gendered language used to describe nature and the animalized language used to describe women. Some discourses link women specifically to the environment because of their traditional role as the nurturer and caregiver. Ecofeminists following in this line of thought believe that these connections are illustrated through the coherence of socially labeled values associated with femininity, such as nurturing, which are present both among women and in nature. Vandana Shiva says that women have a special connection to the environment through their daily interactions, and this connection has been ignored. She says that women and subsistence economies who produce wealth in partnership with nature have been experts in their own right of holistic and ecological knowledge of nature's processes. She makes the point that these alternative modes of knowing, which are oriented to the social benefits and sustenance needs, are not recognized by the capitalist reductionist paradigm because it fails to perceive the interconnectedness of nature or the connection of women's lives, work, and knowledge with the creation of wealth. Shiva blames this failure on the West patriarchy and the patriarchal idea of what development is. According to Shiva, patriarchy has labeled women, nature, and other groups not growing the economy as unproductive. Modern Science and Ecofeminism. In Ecofeminism, 1993, authors Vandana Shiva and Maria Miles ponder modern science and its acceptance as a universal and value-free system. Instead, they view the dominant stream of modern science as a projection of Western men's values. The privilege of determining what is considered scientific knowledge has been controlled by men, and for the most part of history restricted to men. Bondi and Miles list examples including the medicalization of childbirth and the industrialization of plant reproduction. Bondi argues that the medicalization of childbirth has marginalized midwife knowledge and changed the natural process of childbirth into a procedure dependent on specialized technologies and appropriated expertise. A common claim within ecofeminist literature is that patriarchal structures justify their dominance through binary opposition. These include but are not limited to heaven, earth, mind, body, male, female, human, animal, spirit, matter, culture, nature, and white, non-white. Oppression is reinforced by assuming truth in these binaries and instilling them as marvelous to behold through religious and scientific constructs. Vegetarian ecofeminism. The application of ecofeminism to animal rights has established vegetarian ecofeminism, which asserts that omitting the oppression of animals from feminist and ecofeminist analysis is inconsistent with the activist and philosophical foundations of both feminism as a movement to end all forms of oppression and ecofeminism. It puts into practice the personal is political, for it believes that meat eating is a form of patriarchal domination that suggests a link between male violence and a meat-based diet. Vegetarian ecofeminism combines sympathy with the analysis of culture and politics to refine a system of ethics and action. Materialist ecofeminism. Ecofeminism as materialist is another common theme in ecofeminism. A materialist view connects some institutions such as labor, power, and property as the source of domination over women and nature. There are connections made between these subjects because similarly there are varying values in production and reproduction. Spiritual ecofeminism. Spiritual ecofeminism is another branch of ecofeminism and is popular among ecofeminist authors such as Starhawk, Ryan Eisler, Carol J. Adams, and more. Starhawk calls this an earth-based spirituality, which recognizes that the earth is alive, that we are interconnected as well as a community. Spiritual ecofeminism is not linked to one specific religion, but is centered around values of caring, compassion, and nonviolence. Often, ecofeminists refer to more ancient traditions, such as the worship of Gaia, the goddess of nature and spirituality, also known as Mother Earth. Buddhism. Buddhism and feminism simultaneously gained momentum in America during the 1960s. Some of the parallels between these movements include their experiential epistemology, the intersection of the constrained mind, intersectionality and connection, using emotional energy as a coping mechanism, relational ethics, and a communal mindset and lifestyle. Both Buddhist and ecofeminist practitioners viewed nature as a pathway to enlightenment and as a source of many jumping-off points for introspection and deeper thought about the relationship of nature and humans. Judaism. Jewish ideology emphasizes leaving the earth as it was found or in better condition than it was found in. This concept is also promoted through ecofeminist theories and movements. Both Judaism and ecofeminism do not always present as social justice movements, but they often contribute ideals and motivations for social change. Social justice is an important part of Judaism, and many practitioners see social justice as a form of spirituality, and some feel that this form of spirituality through environmental and feminist movements. Hinduism. In Hinduism, the Ganges River is personified by the goddess Ganga. She is a paradoxical deity, as she is supposed to be independent yet guarded, pure yet polluted. Ganga is referred to as a deity to be both subjugated and protected. The underlying tone of the passages is patriarchal despite being reverent. The pollution or purity of the Ganges River is a reflection of Ganga, which represents the relationship between spirituality and nature. Hinduism emphasizes that all lives are connected and indistinguishable. In this context, every life, be it human or animal, is important. Most of the rest of this article just contains examples of different ecofeminist movements, but what I want to close out on is just these couple of passages regarding popular criticisms of ecofeminism, which you'll notice will come from a feminist perspective. They note, in the 1980s and 1990s, some began to see the advancing theories in ecofeminism as essentialist. Through analysis done by post-structural and third-wave feminists, it was argued that ecofeminism equated women with nature. This dichotomy is dangerous because it groups all women into one category and enforces the very societal norms that feminism is trying to break. Out of this critique rose the anti-essentialist argument. Ecofeminist and author Noel Sturgeon says in an interview that what anti-essentialists are criticizing or critiquing is a strategy used to mobilize large and diverse groups of both theorists and activists. Before continuing, I also want to note that when they mention patriarchal religions, it literally redirects to Abrahamic religions. So that's exactly what they actually mean when they say patriarchal religions. They mean the Abrahamic ones. Major critiques. The major criticism of ecofeminism is that it is essentialist. The ascribed essentialism appears in two main areas. One, the adherence of strict dichotomy between men and women. Some ecofeminist critiques are that the dichotomy between women and men and nature and culture creates a dualism that is too stringent and focused in the difference of women and men. That ecofeminism too strongly correlates the social status of women with the social status of nature, rather than the non-essentialist view that women along with nature both have masculine and feminine qualities, and that just like feminine qualities have often been seen as less worthy, nature is also seen as having lesser value than culture, or the qualities involved in these concepts. The second is the divergent view regarding participation in oppressive structures. As opposed to radical and liberation-based feminist movements, mainstream feminism, which is most tightly bound with hegemonic social status, strives to promote equality within the existing social and political structure, such as making it possible for women to occupy positions of power in business, industry, and politics, using direct involvement as the main tactic for achieving pay equity and influence. In contrast, many ecofeminists oppose active engagement in these areas, as these are the very structures that the movement intends to dismantle. Social ecologist and feminist Janet Beale has criticized ecofeminism for focusing too much on a mystical connection between women and nature and not enough on the actual conditions of women. She has also stated that rather than being a forward-moving theory, ecofeminism is an anti-progressive movement for women. Rosemary Radford Ruther, who also critiques this focus on mysticism over work that focuses on helping women, but argues that spirituality and activism can be combined effectively in ecofeminism. A.E. Kings has criticized ecofeminism for limiting itself to focusing only on gender and the environment and neglecting to take an intersectional approach. King says that ecofeminists claim to be intersectional, however have fallen short on their commitment until recently. So what does all of that really mean? Well, I'm sure that the first thing you might have noticed is it's very Marxist. The entire perspective only makes sense if you're a hardline total left-wing person. And this has to do with mostly their definition of capital. But also, I need to quickly criticize this concept of nature. One thing that people forget is that humans are animals, right? Typically, we present nature as like a dichotomy. It's natural versus the artificial, right? Anything humans create is considered sort of unnatural. But when you look at environmental movements, the only logical way to measure them, at least from a humanistic kind of perspective, is to say, how does this affect humans, right? How do we make things improving the quality of life for humans? And although there's some environmental movements that certainly kind of, clean things up and make things a little bit better, there's a lot of these movements that aren't really based on improving the lives of humans. They're not based on finding new ways to feed people or new ways to have energy or things like that, right? A lot of these movements are just based on essentially giving the government more power. And a lot of them assume that there must be a governmental role, and there's very little thought given to the idea that people can do it themselves in a lot of situations. So nature itself, it's constantly changing. They speak of quote unquote irreparable damage to nature. Well, what does that mean? What does that really mean? Does that mean we're trying to maximize the number of like species and animals and plants and things that exist, right? Is it measured just based on extinction? Because we can't measure it just based on things changing. The planet's always changing. Things are constantly changing. What is destruction in nature? Are we just prioritizing a tree over some sand or whatever? There's a lot of things that are really arbitrary when it comes to this concept of nature and of valuing nature. But more importantly, this idea of capital, my conception of capital is very broad. I remember I had a kind of left-leaning professor in like a sociology course I took once in college, and like I asked her, if I go and like I don't know, like pick flowers and then sell them, like are my hands means of production? Is my toothbrush means of production? Because like it's kind of a really necessary thing for a lot of jobs, right? Like you want to have like your teeth brushed, and it kind of can affect your capacity to create things. And this is something that is really arbitrary in Marxist theory, this separation between capital and in property and personal property and means of production. It's all the same shit. It really is all the same shit. And the pattern that I'm seeing here is that they're constantly projecting. They're constantly accusing others of using concepts in ways that they're using it. And again, the reason that they do this is because they want to justify and repackage their initiations of violence and of coercion as retaliations. And because they perceive that they're retaliating, that someone else is doing it, they don't see anything wrong with doing it themselves, even if they're not going to admit it to themselves. But my point is that capitalism was born the moment one person did something nice for someone else. Not even the first time someone sold something, not even the first time someone like used money or whatever. No. The first voluntary association was the birth of capitalism. And the opposite of capitalism is when you do anything that's involuntary, anything that's coerced, anything that's violent. And violent in a sense that it's not a retaliation, an initiation of violent force. And in this really simple paradigm, you can see how that which is social is based on capitalism. And socialism is named this because in an Orwellian sense, they're just named after the opposite of what they are. It's very antisocial. It's forced association. So this is why when they speak of women's contributions not being valued, when a man provides for his family and keeps a roof over their head and keeps them fed and keeps them warm, and procures all these resources for them, shapes the environment to make it safe, to make it hospitable, none of that, from this Marxist point of view, is seen as capital, because their concept of it is so narrow. And this is why they're not perceiving the social exchange that's happening between men and women. And therefore, you see all these feminists make this argument about unpaid labor. They argue that not only should women have their basic needs provided for, but that they should also be paid in money for doing jobs that don't specifically produce like money. And it's very silly. It's just a way of trying to double dip, trying to get paid twice, essentially. And they're accusing other people of saying, oh, well, women's contributions were not valued because they don't value them, because their worldview doesn't place a value on it, so that they can use this as a way of claiming, here's why I should have more. They've essentially just erased it. Now, I should probably try to use the word essentially a little bit less often here, but it's on my mind because they bring it up a lot. If you've done any courses that have to do with feminism or looked into this, you've probably seen or noticed that the term essentialism, it's kind of like their boogeyman. It's kind of a feminist F word, the E word, if you will. And it has to do with dualism. The idea is that things have essences, and under dualism, you create dichotomies that are exclusive, yet together include the whole of a concept. And the idea is that you prescribe essential characteristics to things, and then you put them in dualistic opposition, and that in these oppositions, one thing is always oppressing another. And they listed some of those in the article, like man, woman, culture and nature, black, white, things like that. So the problem here is, just as Marxists, when they undermine capitalism, are attacking the fundamentals of economies. They're attacking the fundamentals of what makes humans social creatures. They're attacking society itself. When they attack essentialism, what they're actually attacking is knowledge itself. And this is because in order to have a word, in order to have a concept, you need an idea of which properties are necessary or accidental for that concept to be useful. If you have a concept and the concept is referring to a thing that has no necessary characteristics that it must have in order to be that thing which you're referring to and then prescribing that name to, then you can't name things. You can't have words. You can't have concepts. But they want to have concepts. They're obviously naming things now. This entire Wikipedia article is laying out some very essential characteristics of ecofeminism. And this is why in those criticisms you see them kind of tripping all over each other, because there's no way to apply this very consistently. But one way that they've managed to sidestep a few of these problems is by creating a distinction between genders themselves and the gender roles. And this is a key thing to keep in mind when comparing ecofeminism to other feminisms. What they're doing is they're saying that women don't naturally have access to this special knowledge. They incidentally do because of their position as oppressed people. And because of and this also they extend to other things like race and things like that. So it really meshes very, very nicely with standpoint theory. And it also allows them to get around a lot of these problems where they're criticized for having, stating that there's essential characteristics of women and how women think. And it also, fits in with the whole gender fluid crowd, right? That men and women don't necessarily have strong properties. They're both capable of transforming completely to the point where there are no necessary characteristics. Now, what ends up happening is because they've associated the male gender role with capitalism, which to them is evil, it is the devil, and they've associated the female gender role with nature and taken all of capitalism's abundance completely for granted, what they want to do is they want to have all of the knowledge of patriarchy and all of the abundance of capitalism, but without a male gender role. And they seem to think that all this shit just comes from the sky. And it's because they haven't really thought about a male perspective. They haven't thought about what men do and sacrifice in order to create a world that can sustain women. They think that women have just been put upon this entire time and that they've gained nothing from their relationship. So you can see how, from a Marxist perspective, all of it totally makes sense, and it's just, they're just leaving these glaring pieces out. So that's why I thought it was actually worth kind of looking through all of that to really hit the point home before I get onto the main topic of this video, which is, in fact, makeup. We're going to listen to some of this professor, Ariel Salleh. It's a Marxist lecture she gave called Marxism and Ecofeminism.
I'm also talking about movement building, and but specifically Marxism, ecofeminism. And I want you to put everything out of your head that you've ever been told about ecofeminism just for tonight and see if this helps. So, in the case of socialist feminists, tend to look to focus their analysis in the space between labour and capital. An ecofeminist, a materialist ecofeminist, focuses on the space between labour and nature. And I like to call that an embodied materialism, and I hope the reason for that will come clear. And perhaps before I start, I'd just like to perhaps give Marx the first word. As he says, the ideal communist society is, quote, the consummate oneness in substance of man and nature, the true resurrection of nature, the naturalisation of man and the humanism of nature, both brought to fulfilment.
See what I mean? They see capitalism as in opposition to nature, and nature as good, and therefore capitalism as evil.
And this intuition was in the minds of women on every continent all over the world, at least as far back as I've looked for the history of ecofeminism, which is in the early 60s, and you had brave American housewives sitting at their kitchen tables, plotting how to bring down Con Edison and other corporations who were fueling the nuclear industry, so to speak, and or Indian women forest dwellers who were combating logging in their environment. And always the common denominator in these struggles was internationally an intuition that care for women's work for everyday life needs is somehow connected with nurture of the living environment, that the two are really ineluctably connected to each other. Well, there was another moment, and this was very important for me in my ecofeminist insights, which was struggling in the environment movement and putting up with the domination and marginalisation by male environmentalists, and that sort of sharpened the sense of the necessity for gender.
Can we just stop and appreciate how much of a pussy you have to be to go into an environmentalist movement and then complain that you're bullied by the male environmentalists? I was on to talk about how she discovered ecofeminism and which groups were very prominent at the time, which isn't really relevant right now.
And myself and another woman, both of us single mothers at the time.
There's your feminist bingo free space.
Section was very useful for this paper because you had an exposition of the great chain of being with God at the top and the entrepreneurs, the capitalist class, and then the workers, and then the women, and then the children, and then animals, and then plants, rocks, water, streams, and so forth. And this Aristotelian mythology, of course, has penetrated Eurocentric cultures and our disciplines and our law and our economic constructs and religions and God knows what else.
What she's referring to, the great chain of being, is basically this idea that all of the things in the universe are part of a hierarchy where you place God at the top, and then you have, kind of like how she describes it, right? Every single being can be placed in some sort of an order, and there's different variants of it, and to different levels of precision. People make arguments that some things are above or below another. And she's correct to criticize it, of course, that it's very arbitrary. However, this is something that's really, really annoying about this perspective. So she says it's Aristotelian, right? And the justification they use for saying that women are lesser than men on it have to do with Aristotle and Plato believing in gender roles and not thinking that women should be educated, or if they are educated, not be educated the same way. The problem, though, the thing that feminists always seem to forget, since they're not applying the theory of gynocentrism, they miss the fact that both Aristotle and Plato are also gynocentric. And what gynocentrism does is it protects and provides for women, and it shields them from the responsibilities that would come with being higher up on that chain. And this again parallels this pattern that we're seeing in this Marxist thought where, everything, all the resources just come from the sky, and there's just a total lack of recognition of the male gender role and of male sacrifice and of what men have to go through in order to satisfy their roles. And, even Aristotle and Plato are guilty of this. They didn't have equal care and compassion and concern for men. How could they possibly? So the irony of it is that the argument she's making has to do with us being biased based on patriarchal styles of thinking, yet what they're actually doing is failing to see that these structures, which are supposedly so instrumental and so fundamental to everything that we think penetrates. God knows what. She'll decide later, when she needs to make a new argument, right? Like, they can't apply this same reasoning to the concept of gynocentrism. And gynocentrism is so much more fundamental because, it affects these thinkers who wrote these supposedly, like, primally fundamental patriarchal kinds of texts.
And propped up, as you'll be familiar with, I'm sure, from other ecofeminist work, with the use of, well, in the last session it was called dissociation, but dualisms. So man over woman, humanity over nature, white over black, and so forth. The impact of these is such that when you come to start reading political economy, you find women either treated as an economic externality or not quite labour, or a condition of production, or even women are a natural resource.
Except when in philosophy for hundreds of years we've had concepts like the appeal to nature fallacy and like the is-ought problem, all of which shut down this idea that when you create categories you also can infuse them with whatever value judgments you want. So this entire style of thinking, there's so many ways out there to shut that down insofar as it actually is applied. I don't really believe there's anything essentially wrong with quote-unquote dualism or like quote-unquote essentialism. I think that their problem with it is that these are distinctions and that these distinctions help build logical arguments, and they don't like logical arguments. They just really don't. Let's go ahead and just read through the abstract of this because that might make more sense of what's going on here. Under capitalism, objectification and exploitation of the environment is in complex ways tied to the structural superordination of men and their resourcing of women. Yet paradoxically, women's historical positioning as mediators of nature for men has inspired ecofeminism as a grassroots counter-globalization movement, a sex-gendered ideology critique, an ecological ethic, and an epistemology from below. It converges with the dialectic of internal relations, an ontology of nature as multidimensional and processual, and a human identity whose labor interaction with nature is self-affirming. Ecofeminists joined the efforts of socialist feminists in the 70s and 80s to situate women's domestic labor in a Marxist problematic. And embodied materialism now complements that economic analysis of the space between capital and labor by focusing on the space between labor and nature. This shifts politics from an androcentric to an ecocentric frame. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are so deep into the heart of social justice that was problematic as a noun. You'll notice they're happy to use the term androcentric, but looks like gynocentric is still not quite on the radar. That's just not quite a concept they're willing to use just yet. Nope, sure not. But basically that was just in so many words saying men have epistemic privilege, epistemology is phallocentric, and it oppresses women because women are oppressed. They're not getting enough free shit. They're not being compensated for the female gender role because that value and that compensation is not expressed in monetary terms. And apparently Marxists, that's really the only way in which value is measured, right? It's kind of ironic, right? They say that we shouldn't have money and capital and things like that, yet they fail to seem to acknowledge all of the ways that women are compensated and advantaged for their role. But again, that's really what I think all this boils down to, is it's just a cheap trick to try to get more shit. I really think that's all that's really going on here. But I've included, lots of quotes and lots of other things, so I'm sure that anybody who's sitting through all of this, there's all kinds of stuff that I'm just not addressing and not picking up on that I'd love to hear some more commentary on, and this would be a fun topic to revisit again also. But what I want to do is kind of let's say that a lot of this is true. Let's say that there's some truth to this idea. One way for us to test this would be to see if women can have a movement that is very anti-makeup, and not anti-makeup for any reasons having to do with like personal choice. No. I want to see, can I find a lot of evidence of women who are against cosmetics? because it's a luxury. It's a pure luxury. It has very little utility. It is something that, really in the context of somebody who is advocating for massive government intervention, massive government control of people's lives, the government to procure resources from other people, if they're advocating for all of these things, well, this can't be a society with luxuries, right? If you have any luxuries, how dare you advocate for any left-wing policies? You have absolutely no grounds for doing this. And this is my major point of departure during the thought audit with other libertarians. I think the thought audit was really funny because most of these women are leftist. I guess I feel bad for any legit ANCAP cam horse that are engaging in counter economics, but I really think it's mostly just lefty bimbos who are just trying to game the system. So of course they should get audited. Of course they should have to fucking pay. There's kind of a justice in that. And it's the same thing with this idea of makeup. I'm not against cam horse, and I'm not against makeup. I think makeup's a great thing. I think it's perfectly fine that people like it or whatever. But if you're someone who indulges in such luxuries, you have absolutely no right to advocate for big government, particularly not big government environmental policies, because as we all know, makeup is a huge industry. They use a shitload of plastic, they use all kinds of chemicals, they test on animals, there's all kinds of problems. It really is the perfect environmental issue. When you look at all of the money that gets spent on makeup, women are literally taking their money, grinding it up into powders and dust, and then putting it on their face, and then they're wiping it off at night. How could you possibly justify that when you also advocate for government programs to forcibly redistribute wealth? It's completely hypocritical. So I think that pointing out makeup is kind of this silver bullet argument that not a lot of people are willing to use because you don't want to seem like a dick. But again, I'll be very clear about this. Unless you're an anarcho-capitalist woman, I don't think that you, as a woman, have the right to wear makeup. Another topic that's really interesting to kind of ponder is the idea of makeup in the workplace. I think that employers should be free to set standards regarding dress and regarding hygiene and things like that, and that can include saying, no makeup at work. I don't want you to wear any makeup. I think that that's a sexual display. We don't need those kinds of displays at work. I think there's a perfectly fine argument to be made there. Although not a lot of people are willing to go there. But when you consider, the concept of sexual harassment and how far-reaching and how often petty it is, I think that, yeah, there's definitely a case to be made that you are sexually harassing people by wearing big, bright makeup that draws attention to you. Particularly when you understand that men are more visually stimulated than women are. So it's very sexist also. So yeah, the case against makeup is actually, as petty as the issue seems, it's kind of surprisingly strong. But of course, we know how most women feel about makeup. And that's why I think this argument is such a great, wonderful thought experiment. The joke during the thought audit was all these women are just going to go small government, go libertarian now. Shit, if that's what it takes. So, maybe an anti-makeup campaign is a thought audit 2.0. But what I wanted to do was to see if when feminists discuss the concept of makeup, first of all, what their stances are, if there's any real consistencies to it, and then for those who are opposed to makeup, are they doing it for environmental reasons or are they doing it for other reasons? Because in theory, if there's any truth to ecofeminism, it should have to do with women as oppressed having this connection to nature, right, and wanting to be stewards of nature. They should realize this thing I use every day is harming the environment, and it's really just a luxury that I don't need, right? Well, let's see what we find here. Let's go down the rabbit hole.
Your makeup is terrible, but I love you anyway.
I wear makeup pretty much every day. I've been doing that since I was about 13. Some days I wear more than others. Sometimes it's just light concealer and mascara. Other days, if you wanted to, you could make little snow angels in my face.
We've got a YouTuber on the case, so surely we won't be disappointed.
My relationship with makeup is quite complicated, as it is for a lot of people. I started wearing it because it was fun. Then I started to have spotty skin. I realized that I felt a lot better about myself and about going out in public if I had concealer on, and then that turned into foundation and concealer. I'm sure that wearing makeup does play a part in me having bad skin, but I have had periods in my life where I've tried to go makeup free for a few weeks and it hasn't made a huge difference.
And maybe it's also bad for the Earth's skin. Maybe.
That's because your skin doesn't change in 2 weeks. I lack the commitment to do anything that doesn't have instant results. If you have never had bad skin, you don't understand it. I know this sounds very dramatic, but seriously, you wake up every day and look in the mirror and you have no idea what you're gonna find. Having spots can make you feel terrible about yourself. You feel so aware of them, even though other people aren't. And I'm saying this as someone who's only ever had moderately bad skin. Most of the time my skin is okay. Because for some people, spots don't just make them self-conscious. Serious acne can be really painful. It can lead to anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. People go on really serious medication, which can have loads of health ramifications. It can really wreak havoc on your life.
I mean, okay, but like makeup doesn't solve all of those most severe issues. It just like covers it up and as you admitted, kind of like makes it worse. But I don't think that's really the point she's getting at. I'm sure she's going to get to in the environment soon.
It's not always that bad. These are kind of very extreme days. But I feel like these are just things that people with clear skin never think about.
Yep, add that to the privilege list. Clear skin privilege.
Not how everyone reacts to having spots. I'm quite a sensitive person about this stuff. I shouldn't even call it bad skin because it's a completely normal thing to happen to you.
All right, well, we got the body pause message in there, and I don't think she's going to get to the environment. Let's see what else she covers.
I understand why people see makeup as a sexism issue. I don't think it's makeup itself that's sexist, even though it might have sexist origins.
I kind of doubt that one. I could be wrong. I haven't looked into it, but I'm kind of skeptical of that.
There's a lot of sexism around makeup. Women are often expected to wear it, which removes the element of choice.
No, that's not how choice works. An expectation doesn't remove your choice. And this is why there's such an issue with it. It's because like just to have your agency robbed that easily over expectations. I'm sorry. This is why I say women gotta man up. You gotta man up. Seriously. Removes the element of choice and expectation. Are you kidding me? No, it's not how choice works. If you think that's how choice works, you shouldn't be allowed to have choices.
See a lot of that. I prefer my women without makeup stuff from dudes. It's meant to be like enlightened. But in my experience, that means I want women to not look like they're wearing makeup. But if I show up places without makeup, I'm often asked what's wrong or if I'm ill. So then after being expected to wear it and conditioned to think that it's normal.
Break the conditioning. You gotta break the conditioning.
Enjoying makeup is seen as like a feminine weakness.
Thank God this video dispelled that myth.
Like it's still widely considered to be a silly hobby to have, or thing to spend money on, or thing to like base your career around.
It's a luxury, and all luxuries are kind of silly. And really, if you look at capitalism, we like a lot of silly shit, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but yeah, it is a silly thing. You're taking it way too seriously.
Mocked wearing makeup because it's seen as girly and not masculine and therefore bad.
I hate this argument so much. No. It's so men doing girly things is specifically what's seen as bad. It's not women doing girly things. It's only when men do it. But what this argument does is it takes sexist issues that are applied to men, and it's a way of repackaging it as a women's issue, right? Because it's the female thing that's seen as inferior, you know? And it's so infuriating because like all this feminist rhetoric is all about standpoint and everything, but oh look, as soon as you have an issue where it's like clearly a form of like harassment or disadvantage targeted at men, oh well, now we have a way to repackage that as, oh, it's seen as bad because it's feminine, therefore it's just an extension of patriarchy. It's so fucking stupid. I'm so sick of that argument. Stop.
Obviously, anybody should be able to wear makeup if they want to, and to not wear makeup if they don't. And then obviously the other problem with I prefer women without makeup is that there's still this idea that women dress or make themselves up to impress men.
You know, I hear a lot more about this when people complain that it's a standard, rather than like people just saying that that's what women do. It's obvious that women wear makeup for all kinds of different reasons, and yes, very often women are wearing makeup to impress men, and it is like a sexual display. Obviously, women also dress for other women too. Like, everybody gets this, but I don't understand why it has to be this big issue that, like, you think that your intentions for wearing makeup are always being misconstrued. It seems like a pretty ridiculous demand to always expect everybody to, first of all, care, and then second of all, like, for whatever their theory is for you wearing makeup, it has to be the correct one. Have you ever considered just, like, kind of giving less of a shit?
I know a lot of this isn't going to be like new information for you. There are no revelations here.
Right, and the reason I included this video is because I think it's a pretty succinct sort of summary of a lot of the very common attitudes that most feminists today have regarding makeup and the makeup conversation. But yeah, there's really not much new here.
Just feel like I can't talk about my relationship with makeup without talking about that wider context. Because I wear makeup because I enjoy it, yeah, but also because I feel like I need it to feel good about myself. I like feeling confident about myself and how I look. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I don't know how I should feel about the fact that some of the reasons why I want to wear makeup are probably rooted in sexism. So yeah, it's my choice to wear makeup.
Thank you.
I don't hate my face without it, but sometimes I prefer my face with it. I think my experience is very limited because I am a cis woman. If you're a trans man or a trans woman, or if you don't identify as male or female, I feel like your relationship with makeup might be even more complicated than this. Or maybe simpler. I don't know. If you wear makeup or if you don't, I'm really interested to know why. So if you feel comfortable talking about it, please leave a comment because I would like to have a discussion.
All right, let's go to the comments section and see if we can find ourselves some ecofeminism, some good environmental arguments. I feel like at least one person in her comment section has got to bring up the argument that quitting makeup can be good for the environment. And then maybe there's a lot of other very strong arguments she can pair that with, like that it's better for your skin, you shouldn't support sexist structures or whatever. But I really think if we go through this comment section, we'll find at least one person who brings up the ecofeminist angle. So let's see what we can find.
I think feminism is about giving women choice, so criticizing women for wearing or not wearing makeup is taking away their choice. What I hate though is that men think women are wearing makeup to look more attractive for them. Usually women are trying to look better for themselves, but there are tons of reasons why women wear makeup. P.S. Lex, you look beautiful, so please don't worry. I've never worn makeup because I feel worse when I look like I care about my appearance. Does that make any sense? Looking like I've made an effort makes me feel self-conscious and like everyone's staring at me. I had a massive reaction to medication I was on a couple of years ago and was left with an angry red mass of spots on my cheeks for about 3 months and still couldn't bear the thought of looking like I cared. Please tell me it's not just me. I wear makeup because I look a bit younger than I am, and usually if my face is all done up and I'm wearing professional clothes, I found that people at work take me more seriously and make less comments about how young I look. So I see it as a necessity to be more successful in my career, but not a necessity to feeling good about myself. I wear makeup because it makes me feel prettier, more confident, and more put together, or it makes me feel like I'm putting more effort into looking put together, ha ha. It's almost like armor, like when I wear it I feel more prepared for whatever the day brings me. I didn't start wearing makeup until high school. Just mascara at first, then gradually through the years and I just started on Accutane. I'm not completely like you. I started wearing makeup because it was fun and new. I'm so embarrassed that I need to cover up eyes and dark under eyes of insecurity. I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos about makeup, but I've been about 3 months.
Why is this shit on trending? And I'm gonna give you a like.
Makeup itself is sexist. It's just a paint. It's the behavior of popular forcing or expecting women to wear makeup and men not to. I will say that. How did you ever get away?
One thing is for certain. Some makeup is made out of the foreskin of little boys. And thank you, Benjamin. I will give you a like because you are based and red-pilled.
I never wear makeup and people often assume it's some kind of political statement from me, but I actually just like the way no makeup looks. I think that most people look better with no makeup. I hate the fact that I don't wear such makeup is a big deal to some people. It should be a completely neutral action with no connotation surrounding it. On an individual scale, I think makeup can be feminist. It's empowering for some people, and it's fine if they want to wear it, but I feel like we should be critical of our actions because they don't exist in a vacuum, and And by buying and wearing makeup, we are contributing to a sexism, whether that is our intention or not, and feeding the capitalist system, basically filling the pockets of old white dudes. I think we should also be critical of why we think that makeup is so empowering, and why we think it's a choice for women to wear it when really it's not. Women won't be hired, could be fired, will be publicly ridiculed, won't be taken as seriously, etc. if they don't wear makeup. And yeah, if you can put up with that and not wear makeup, it's your choice, but we shouldn't have to make that choice. I also feel like a lot of the empowering elements to makeup is a marketing scheme, like winged eyeliner so sharp you could kill a man, etc. It's kind of encouraging you to fight against the patriarchy, but if you buy into it, you're kind of feeding the system. This is just one example, and I'm not explaining it very well, but it's basically the idea of weaponized feminism/femininity. Again, I think people want to wear makeup, it's fine, but I don't think it'll ever be empowering in a systemic sense, or even on an individual basis, because really there's no choice without consequence.
And spoiler alert, this is the closest any of the comments get to endorsing any kind of like pro-environment sort of a notion. You know, the closest it is just appealing to her blatant misandry. And don't you love that to her, literally the definition of choices is for it to be free of consequence. Once there's a consequence involved, it's not a choice anymore. Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that freaking amazing? Just the honesty in this comment. All right, so I know that this has been a very, very long and excruciating and terrible video. Probably the most, anybody who has watched all of this video, I probably owe a beer if I ever find you in person. But I think there's a lot is being demonstrated here. You have these ecofeminists, right, who claim that to be oppressed gives you this epistemic insight. This is this sort of way of knowing that puts you in tune with nature, right? That specially equips you to deal with these issues and to be sensitive towards nature. And then you have a new kind of countercultural view in the theory of gynocentrism that says, no, women were never really oppressed. In fact, most of human history and human societies are based around the need to care for and protect and provide for women. And thus, capitalism is driven by a lot of female desires and female demands, because men are so gynocentric. That's why women control such a huge disproportionate amount of the spending, right? But what you see in all of this feminist rhetoric is exactly how this all plays out. They have all these special advantages, and then what they do is they repackage their selfishness and their solipsism as a fight against oppression in order to seem noble when really they're just being selfish. And again, I have nothing against makeup. I have nothing against selfishness per se. I have nothing against people liking capitalism and liking products and everything like that. Absolutely not. I think those things are perfectly fine. I think that perhaps people just don't like commercialism. They don't like it because it reflects who we are, and who we are a bunch of gynocentric monkeys. That's really what humans have amounted to. But I think that we can be something better than that. But the first step is to acknowledge where we are now, and to acknowledge that the market is not oppressing us. The market is reflecting our characters, and our character as a society just sucks. So the first step is to acknowledge that. It's to acknowledge that it sucks, and then to ask, can we demand things that are better? And really, truly, we can. There's a lot of solutions for helping the planet and being much more, environmental and a lot more clean in capitalism. Insofar as the consumer values those things, you can create alternative products that have less chemicals in them, and you can take these approaches within capitalism. But of course, when Marxism, when Marxists try to take on any problem, they really just make it worse. Everybody knows that governments are extremely wasteful, and I don't believe that anybody who legitimately cares about the environment should be advocating for a government-based solution. And certainly, people who do advocate for government-based solutions are complete hypocrites when they indulge in luxuries such as makeup. So keep this in mind. If a woman is wearing makeup and she's also supporting the left, she's a hypocrite, and point it out to her. That's really the gender flip equivalent of punching a dude in the nutsack. Go straight for the makeup if she's being a socialist. You know, so I think the only women who are entitled to wearing makeup are anarcho-capitalist women. All the other women have absolutely no right to wear makeup. They're all hypocrites. Because what they're saying is that we have these societal needs, right? These needs which outweigh your luxuries, right? All of your extra wealth, all of these profits that you're making, that's just luxury, right? You should give that up because your basic needs have already been met. And the basic needs of others are more important than your luxuries. Well, let's go ahead and apply this argument to makeup. But what's really funny here is that it's pretty obvious that this ecofeminist narrative of women being better advocates for the environment is complete bullshit when you look at the way spending is and look at how wasteful women are when you look at feminine products like makeup. But I did manage to find one example. I found one example of an anti-makeup movement, right? Because this feminist, this very Western feminist, she's not really anti-makeup. She uses makeup. She just thinks there's issues with it, but it's all very wishy-washy. You could even see that in the comments. Even the one who kind of had a few pretty sharp critical things to say about makeup itself, even she isn't willing to take it to the point where she says, yes, on an individual scale, makeup is wrong, because they don't want to divorce their position from choice feminism, right? And this is why I actually do have a little bit more respect for those feminists who say, no, feminism is not about choice. If you're going to follow this narrative, yeah, if feminism is about equality and it is about principles, it shouldn't just be about choices for women. People who are saying feminism is about giving women more choices, they're all but admitting that it's just all about giving women free shit and not about principles. And this is why I really have a problem with traditionalist women. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of these traditionalist women, they see this problem of the way the sexes are, and they can recognize gynocentrism, and a lot of them will even say, yeah, women shouldn't vote, women shouldn't have the same rights, they should be subordinate to men. And I just see it as so frickin' weak. Can you imagine getting red-pilled and kind of noticing all of these problems between men and women and noticing how feminism has hurt society, and then in response to it saying, oh yeah, I'll just land on my back now. Now that feminism has jumped the shark, I'm just gonna, cut my losses here and we'll try to roll things back to traditionalism. Can you imagine not even wanting to try something better, not even wanting to see, what, let's see if women can do better. Nope, they've just given up and they've just said, nope, this is the maximum women are capable of, and I'm just going to draw the line here and we're just going to go back to traditionalism, as if that's even an option at this point. But let's move on to the final phase of this video, which is the anti-makeup campaign that launched in
From lipsticks
Korea.
to concealers, South Korean women are destroying their makeup, defiantly going against social norms.
Ever since I was young, I was taught, listening and watching K-pop, that I need to be beautiful. If I gain value in society only when I'm pretty, I wanted to bust out of that.
So again, it's a lot of the same tired arguments about beauty standards, but at least here, they're not totally fucking powerless, right? At least these women are taking on some agency, and rather than saying, oh, well, since I feel like makeup gives me an edge, I feel compelled to do it, they're saying, insofar as makeup gives me an edge, I reject that, and I don't want that edge. I want it to be measured by the standards that men are measured by.
Are both part of a new movement known as Escape the Corset. In response, women are chopping their hair and ditching their makeup, and by doing so, they're rejecting the overbearing beauty standards society imposes on them.
I love the way he emphasizes the word society, because this is a thing in Marxist styles of thinking, is you have to have structural violence, and that's when you attribute agency to non-agents. And the reason you do this is because you need reality to be a perpetrator in order to justify retaliations against reality, when in fact your so-called retaliations are actually just initiations of violence. So that's why society has to be emphasized as the big bad guy here.
This area or that area, make my eyes look bigger, my eyebrows a certain shape, and lose this much weight. And if I accomplished that I would gain value. I constantly disparaged myself and adjusted myself to the male gaze, and I was judging myself according to that.
And I think that's what's really going on here is she's been exposed to feminist rhetoric and she bought into it. And now that she's at least admitting that that's where her motivation is, insofar as she admits that she was doing this to try to appeal to men, you know, the Western women, they won't do this because they don't want to admit that that's ever a consideration, right? Unless it's to demonize men. But she's admitting it at least a little bit here, right? So because she's able to admit that much, she's at least able to find the tiny bit of agency it takes to just cut your hair and not paint your face
South Korea
and
is
be
the
judged by the
fourth
standards
largest
that men
cosmetics
just already have to
industry in
deal
the
with.
world. Dubbed K-beauty, South Korean cosmetic companies rake in tens of billions of US dollars every year.
Whenever makeup companies want to release a product, they often use Korea as an indicator to test how well it might sell. While it's a testament to how strong South Korea's market is, looking at it in another way, it also shows how much pressure South Korean women face when it comes to maintaining their appearance.
So once again, women are oppressed by their choices. You have a strong, thriving market based on women's consumer choice and their consumer power. And because women have that power, you know, they that's why they're oppressed. You know, it may just be that with power and with choice comes responsibility, but no, the responsibility from a female perspective is just apparently perceived as oppression, as it's so much social pressure now, right? And I think a lot of this has to do with women's social-based morality, and I think they need to ditch it. I don't think it's asking too much for them to just ditch it, and I think these Korean women are demonstrating that this capacity in women absolutely does exist.
Momentum in South Korea as well. Weekly protests bring out tens of thousands of people fighting for gender equality.
Well, wait, do they support Me Too, or do they support gender equality? Because those things are the opposite.
To change tactics. This movement is trying to break stereotypes, not only here in South Korea, but around the world. It's sending a message that when it comes to women, there's more to them than meets the eye.
Nobody doubts that there's more to women than what meets the eye, and nothing will tell you more about this than the reasons that people give for turning to love dolls. You see, it's not because these love dolls can reach these physically unattainable standards of beauty. Certainly that's a factor. Certainly that helps make these love dolls more appealing, but the real reasons have to do with extra baggage that a lot of women bring with them because of their behaviors and because we have a social standard that says that we're not allowed to criticize these behaviors.
Since cutting her hair and going natural. But she
That's
says
probably
she feels
just women who are
liberated
jealous
since
that she has
joining
great
the
skin.
Escape Corset movement. I hope women are not seen as dolls, she says, but respected as human beings. Joseph Kim, TRT World, Seoul.
Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If there was anything that you saw on the screen or anything that I read, particularly from that Wikipedia article on ecofeminism that you think maybe we should expand the conversation on, obviously I like to read the comments. Everybody keep it easy, and you guys have a very nice day.
Hi bitch, hi bitch, hi bitch, hi bitch, hi bitch.